Hey friends, and welcome back to Trying to with Leah, where we are constantly trying to become better people and learn from whatever life is trying to teach us. Today, I wanted to talk about how to actually integrate life's lessons once we learn them so that we don't just keep repeating the same cycles over and over again. I think that life will continue to teach us the same thing repeatedly until it finally clicks. Until you not only start looking at things differently and recognizing those patterns, but you decide to start responding differently too. Of course, that is a lot easier said than done. I think most of us can probably relate to the feeling like we learn the same lessons over and over again. I know I definitely do. But there's certain habits and coping mechanisms and thought patterns that I feel like I've been trying to work through for years. And a big one for me has always been shutting down instead of opening up. Whenever conversations get vulnerable or emotional, or I have to express how I'm feeling when I'm really stressed, my default response is usually to shut down and shut up instead of communicating. I think I learned pretty early on that just staying quiet and not expressing how I feel feels a lot safer and a lot more comfortable for me. And trying to unlearn something that has really been your automatic response your entire life is not easy. Sometimes it feels like you are taking a step forward and 2 steps back. You think you make progress, and then you catch yourself slipping right back into old habits. And then you get frustrated with yourself because you thought you had already worked through that. And this week, I found myself struggling with that a lot. It's definitely been one of those weeks where it feels like every part of my life is just completely overwhelming all at once. But I noticed that the more overwhelmed I became, the harder it was to communicate what I was actually feeling. And I think part of that is because I couldn't actually articulate it because it wasn't just one thing, it was everything all at once. It was kind of like I didn't even know where to start. So instead, I just do what I usually do, which is smile through it, keep it to myself, and try and act normal. And I think I've gotten pretty good at that. Most people genuinely cannot tell when I'm struggling or when I'm stressed unless I actually say it out loud, which I usually don't. And I think I learned that a lot in my career. I learned how to just make myself seem okay, even if I'm not okay at all. It's kind of like that leave it at the door energy. If I can just smile my way through the day, then nobody's going to know how stressed and how overwhelmed I actually am underneath all of that. And it's kind of crazy because some people that are close with me will see my videos and they'll be like, I had no idea you felt this way. I had no idea you'd gone through something that difficult. And I'm always like, yeah, that's on purpose. I was not actually planning to let anybody know until I decided to make the video. I've been very comfortable just masking things throughout my life. But after a while, you start to realize that shutting down like that and keeping everything inside doesn't actually fix anything. It's kind of like it just traps those emotions inside of you and nothing actually changes. Nobody can support you if they don't actually know that you need support. And nobody's going to be able to understand what's wrong if you never talk about it. And I think that that's something that life definitely keeps trying to teach me. So I recently found myself in a conversation where I forced myself to communicate things that I would have just kept to myself. And I could literally feel how uncomfortable that was. It was like my nervous system was just flooded with chaos. All I wanted to do was shut down because that's what feels familiar and that's what's safe. But afterward, even though I was forcing myself to talk about it, I also felt relief. Not because the conversation fixed everything, because it definitely didn't, but because I handled it differently than I normally would have. I did not shut down. I opened up. And maybe that sounds like something small, but to me, it felt really big. And I think that's another thing that I've been learning a lot lately too. Sometimes progress looks a lot smaller and a heck of a lot messier than we expect it to. Sometimes it's just recognizing a pattern sooner. And sometimes it's catching yourself halfway through instead of after the damage has already been done. And I think that sometimes it's also just trying again after watching yourself fall back into your old habits for the 100th time. But I think that still counts as progress. And I think giving yourself grace during that process is extremely important, even though that is definitely something that I struggle with a lot. None of this is easy, and I don't think it's meant to be, because real progress means you have to put in real effort. When you notice yourself repeating the same lessons, you can start to feel disappointed in yourself, or even convince yourself that you're not doing enough or you're not growing fast enough. But realistically, we are all still learning all of the time. And it's rare for us to actually get something right the first time and then to make it click and stick. Some lessons are just going to take longer to understand, and especially the uncomfortable ones. The ones that force you outside of your comfort zone and make you confront parts of yourself that you would rather avoid are usually the most important lessons to learn. And opening up when you're used to shutting down is definitely something that falls into that category for me. But I do think that the more that you practice these healthier responses, the more natural they start to become. At first, it feels forced and uncomfortable and awkward, but over time, you start to build up trust and confidence in yourself, and that helps it come more naturally. You start proving to yourself that maybe that vulnerability and going outside of your comfort zone isn't actually as dangerous as you thought it was. And maybe that's part of integrating the lesson too. Not just understanding something logically, but actually applying it in your own life over and over again until it becomes a part of you. And it becomes how you respond instead of something that you're just constantly fighting against. And I've also been thinking a lot lately about how sometimes the repeated lesson is not just about our own patterns, but about finally learning to recognize those patterns in other people too. I think a lot of us can be very emotionally aware and still just ignore what's right in front of us if we care about somebody enough, especially if we can see their potential. And that's something that we do in relationships and friendships and even with family sometimes. We see the potential of who somebody could be, and then we're going to attach ourselves to that version and just ignore who they actually are at this moment. And I don't mean that in a harsh way. I think sometimes we just give people the benefit of the doubt or explain away things that we should probably be looking at, because acknowledging those things means that those red flags were actually there for a reason. And obviously, nobody is perfect. We all have flaws. We all have wounds and unhealthy patterns that we're trying to work through and things we're trying to heal. But I do think that recognizing those patterns matters because they do tell you something important. They can tell you how somebody handles conflict, how they communicate or respond when they're uncomfortable. They can tell you how they treat people when things get difficult and how willing they are to actually take responsibility and accountability. And I think sometimes deep down we notice those things early on, but we just don't want to accept what we're seeing. We get so focused on maintaining those connections that we start disconnecting from ourselves. And we can even ignore our own discomfort and completely overlook behavior that actually really does hurt us. But eventually, overriding your own feelings is going to catch up with you. And I think that's part of why self-awareness matters so much, because the more you can recognize your own patterns, the more you can also recognize the patterns that are happening around you. You start noticing what feels emotionally healthy and what doesn't. And I think that life teaches us these lessons not to become cynical or hypercritical of people, but so that we can move through our relationships more intentionally, with clearer boundaries and better communication and more self-respect and honesty. And as uncomfortable as recognizing and trying to change these patterns might be, I think that's some of the most important work you can do. And maybe that's what integrating life's lessons actually looks like. Maybe it's just choosing differently in small, little ways. Being a little bit more honest with yourself, communicating a little more openly, and abandoning yourself a little bit less. I think that sometimes we expect healing to feel huge and life-changing, and we expect it to stick. But really, it's just a ton of really small choices that are repeated consistently. And of course, I'm still trying to figure out all of this myself. So please do not think that I'm sitting here trying to act like I've mastered any of life's lessons, because I definitely haven't. Half the time, I'm still catching myself falling back into old patterns and old coping mechanisms without even realizing it. But I do think there's a lot of value in at least being aware of your own patterns. Because once you become aware of it, it becomes a lot harder to keep pretending that it isn't there. So this week, I've been trying to reflect on all of this stuff myself. And I wanted to ask myself the important questions, like, what patterns do I keep repeating in my own life? What behaviors do I keep defaulting back to whenever I'm overwhelmed? What am I tolerating that maybe I shouldn't be tolerating anymore? Where am I still abandoning myself just to keep the peace? And what lessons keep showing up that I still have not fully integrated? So I thought that maybe that could be the challenge for you guys this week too. Just taking some time to honestly reflect on the patterns that keep showing up in your own life. And I encourage you to come at it from a place of genuine curiosity and intentionally try to avoid shaming yourself for whatever you find. Okay, so let me know in the comments if you related to any of this, and especially if you also struggle with shutting down or repeating the same lessons over and over again. And if you found healthy ways to better integrate life's lessons or communicate more openly, I genuinely want to hear your perspective, because I think conversations like this help all of us to feel less alone while we're trying to figure things out. None of us have everything mastered, and we can all be students and teachers for each other at the same time. So thank you guys so much for being here with me this week and for continuing to try. I'll see you guys next time.